the things that makes studying the parables of Jesus challenging is that we've heard them before. We know how they end. Some of us may know how they start. The lead lines, the tag lines, maybe even some of the content and the meaning itself. And sometimes that keeps us from hearing them in a fresh way, maybe to such an extent that the meaning of the parable or the content of it gets distorted. So sometimes a good place to start parable study is to not deal with the biblical ones, but to deal with the non-canonical ones, to deal with what you might call secular parables. Even Jesus' parables sounded pretty secular to the people that heard them. They had biblical background and nuance to them, but they were wholly secular, and that's why they weren't a threat to people. So what I would like to do is tell 3 parables, 3 stories. And in telling those non-biblical ones, set us up for a study of parables and how to interpret them. The first story I'd like to deal with is the story of the Jewish tailor. The Jewish tailor. And the second story, or parable if you will, would be the needy family. The needy family. The third story would be the broken car. The broken car. 3 parables that I trust, if you have ears to hear them, you'll begin to think about some features, principles, purposes, functions of the biblical parables, if you can hear these. So first, the parable of the Jewish tailor. There was a Jewish tailor who moved his business from one village to another, and he set up shop and he began his business. Was getting acquainted in the community, greeting people as they would come to bring their tailoring needs to his shop. And when it rolled around to Sabbath, after he had gotten settled, he decided that he would go to Sabbath service, participating in the faith community of his group. He went there on that Friday evening and he greeted some of the people and sat down in the seat there, and the service began. The presider of the service got up and welcomed everybody. We're glad to have you all here tonight. We especially want to welcome you visitors or new folks. We want to apologize that our rabbi is not here tonight. He couldn't be here because he's gone to heaven. And the Jewish tailor thought, oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear about the rabbi dying. And so they had the service, and the Jewish tailor leaves the service. And as he leaves, he shakes the hand of the presider of the synagogue service that night. And he said, boy, I'm really sorry to hear about the rabbi dying. And the presider said, oh, he didn't die. He went to heaven. He'll be back. He just went to heaven. He's coming back. Well, the Jewish tailor thought, this is most odd. I've never heard of such a thing. I wonder what he means. So he went the next week and did his tailoring business, was getting more acquainted in the community, meeting people. His business began to take off. Friday synagogue service rolled around. He went back to the synagogue. Sure enough, same thing. Greeted the people, same presider, no rabbi. He hears the presider get up and welcome everybody. We're grateful you're here tonight. We also especially want to spend a special welcome to the guests that are here, visitors. And we're sorry that a rabbi can't be here tonight, but he's gone to heaven. And the Jewish tailor thought, this is most odd. This is strange. Well, he went home again from the service, and he was working about in the village there that week, and lo and behold, he saw the rabbi. I mean, you could tell by how they dress and carry themselves. So he thought, okay, I'm going to follow him. He followed him and found out where he lived, and he thought, I'm going to wait till synagogue service and figure this out. So Friday night came, and he went over to the Jewish rabbi's house, kind of waited at a safe distance so as not to be noticed by others. And sure enough, out a little bit ahead of service time came the rabbi. He had a satchel over his shoulder that he was carrying. He proceeded through the town, through the village, and then out of town and out into a bunch of wooded areas, a forest of sorts. And pretty soon he came to a clearing. The Jewish tailor following at a safe distance, keeping himself out of the line of sight of the rabbi. And in this clearing there was a stump, and in the stump was an axe. And the rabbi put down his pack from his shoulder. He picked the axe out of the stump, and he began to chop some firewood. And he loaded that in one arm, put the axe back down in the stump, loaded his satchel over his shoulder, and went further into the woods. The Jewish tailor, watching all of this, observing, thinking, why isn't he at service? It's time for the service. What's he doing? And he finally comes to another clearing, and in this clearing in the forest, there is this old, dilapidated, kind of rundown house. It's filled with little orphan children who, when they see the rabbi, come running out to greet him, hug him on the thighs, try to find their way to, and out comes a widow woman who cares for these orphan children. The rabbi greets the children. He puts the wood down. He takes his pack. He dishes out candy. He gives them little toys from his pack. And then he picks up the wood and he goes inside the widow woman's home and he stokes her fire in her wood stove so that she can cook as well as have some heat for the night. And they talk and he plays with the children, and long about dark he says his goodbyes to the widow woman and the children, puts his pack on his back, and walks back to the village. The Jewish tailor, observing all this from a distance, trying to make sense of it. What's going on? Why does the rabbi miss the service? Well, another week took place. The rabbi once again does what he does, and the Jewish tailor does what he does. He goes to synagogue service. He sits down, no rabbi, and the presider does the same thing. We want to extend a greeting to all of you here tonight. We especially want to welcome our visitors and our friends. He said, we're sorry our rabbi can't be here tonight, but he's gone to heaven. At which point, that Jewish tailor stands to his feet and interrupts the service and says, no, he didn't. Well, that got everybody's attention. No, he didn't. He didn't go to heaven. I know where he went. He didn't go to heaven. And everybody turns and their eyes all focus on this new fella in town, this Jewish tailor. And the Jewish tailor looks around that auditorium, sees all those eyes on him, thinks through what he saw in the forest, and then says this: he didn't go to heaven. He went higher than heaven. End of story. Is it possible that you can tell a powerful parable by just breaking off the thought? You just sort of don't give it an ending. You just let the people who hear it make up the ending. Is that a possibility? Parable number 2, a needy family. A student told this one day in one of my classes. Way back years ago, there was a signature group at the college where I teach called the Impact Brass and Singers, and they did programs literally across the nation, kind of expository teaching, preaching programs. They had skits and songs and instrumental numbers and various things in these programs. Well, it was pretty much a customary thing in those days that they would go to maybe one church for a weekend and give their entire series of 3 or 4 programs. The routine was always the same. They'd take the kids at the end of the first night and they'd bring them down front in the auditorium of the church, and they'd have church people who were going to host these kids in their home come and kind of get their kids for the night or for the weekend. And so they were dividing up the students to go with various homes, and a couple came forward and said, who do we take? And, oh, you take this young man and this young man. And so the 2 boys went home with this generous family. They had a late night meal since they didn't want to eat before the program, and so they were sitting around the dinner table, and the student said, you know, it was an okay house. I mean, it was a little need of repair here and there, but it was clean, not cluttered, and we were grateful to have a place to stay for the night. And so he began, the student, to engage the man of the house in conversation. How long have you lived here? How long have you been a member of the church? What do you do for a living? Uh-oh. What do you do for a living? He said, well, nothing. He said, I just got a new job. And he said, man, I was without work for 3 years, so I'm really grateful for this job. And the student said, well, what is it? And the guy told him. He's very excited about it. And then the student said, well, boy, what'd you do all the time you were off work? You got laid off. What'd you do? He said, well, it was pretty tough. He said, the wife had a part-time job. I did a few little odd jobs here and there, but I kept looking earnestly for work and just couldn't find any. It got pretty rough, to tell you the truth. Well, the student felt bad, said, well, I hope we're not a burden on you tonight. Oh, so no. We wanted to do this. We wanted to host you. We're so glad that you came to our church and presented this program. It's great. And then the student said, well, I suppose when you were needy, the church helped you. And the student said, without any bitterness in the man's voice, he just said, well, not exactly. He said, we did ask for some help at one point from the church when they turned our power off. We just couldn't pay the electric bill, and so they finally turned our power off. Good thing it wasn't the dead of winter. But he said they turned it off, and we asked the church for some help, and without any bitterness in the man's voice, the student said. And by the way, they didn't leave the church. They stayed in this is their church. They didn't leave the church. He said, we asked for help, but they couldn't help us. They just said they couldn't do it. And the student said, what'd you do? How'd you get by? He said, well, our neighbors helped. He said, you'd not like our neighbors probably very much. He said, they're not very good people. They constantly carouse on the street, and they're constantly having parties and this and that. And boy, a lot of alcohol and drugs and difficult things, and they're ripping rubber off their tires on their cars, and we're afraid they're going to hit one of the kids. We don't even let our kids play with their kids because their kids use bad language, and you probably wouldn't like our neighbors very well. The student said, why are you telling me about your neighbor? He said, well, when they cut our power off, one night we sat down to have dinner. We still had a gas cook stove, and they hadn't shut our gas off. We hadn't paid that bill either. But we sat down. The meal for the night was 1 can of green beans. My wife had opened it and cooked it on the gas stove and put it in a bowl, and we sat down and we thanked God for the beans. And that's when we heard a knock at the door. And we went to the door and opened it up. And he says, there was my carousing neighbor, holding an electrical cord in his hand. And the electrical cord reached across his yard and my yard to an outlet on the outside of his house. And I said, can I help you? And the guy said, well, I heard they shut your power. He's very awkward looking at his shoes. I heard they shut your power off. You can't live without electricity. I come to plug in your fridge. Here. And he handed him the electrical cord. Church couldn't help or wouldn't help. Neighbor, not the greatest of reputations, he helped. Is it possible that a parable could make the bad guy into a good guy, and the good guy into a bad guy? Needy family. Third parable, the broken car. This actually happened to me. I was serving in teaching and administration. We did not have a full-time deaf communications professor at the college. We had a part-time, and this gal had recently married a deaf husband. They lived in Tulsa, and she would travel back and forth on the turnpike to do her work for the college. And one night, just before getting on the turnpike, their car had broken down. They were able to get it off of the highway and nurse it into the little rest stop there, just before you get on the turnpike. And then it died on them. And she didn't know who else to call, so she called me. And I had just gotten home, still had a tie on from work, and I picked up the phone. She said, Brother Scott, this is Vonda. The car broke down. We're right here by the turnpike. I don't know. Sorry to bother you, especially right now. Could be dinner time, but I need some help. Could you please? I said, boy, Vonda, I'll tell you, I don't know much about cars. I'm not a very good mechanic. Please. Okay. So I got my tool set, hammer and screwdriver, and got in the car and go out to this little rest stop. And I noticed when I got there, I could see Vonda and I could see her husband Rodney, and they were kind of in one little area there of the rest stop. And their hood was up on their car, and I thought, oh, great. there's this guy decked out in leather. I can see his Harley close by. I thought, she's gotten in cahoots with a biker. Oh, for heaven's sakes. So I walk up to the car. The biker is there looking at their motor. I said, hey, I teach at the college where this gal teaches. I said, anything I can do to help? He took one look at me and said, I don't think so. Self-esteem went to the roof. Anyway, I said, what's going on? And he said, I think it's a clogged line. The filter's clogged. So he motions to Rodney. He had taken the filter off and banged it. And Rodney tries to start the car. Wouldn't start. So the biker dude takes out one of his tools from his boot, punches a little button, and it whips out. And he decides he's going to trim this line. He uses it as a screwdriver to take off the little clamps. He pulls that little line off that has the clogged filter in it. He goes over to his bike, and like a physician with an instrument, he's able to remove a little piece of flexible pipe from his bike, and he brings that over to the car. He reattaches the clamps. He motions to Rodney. No filter in there, but straight. Anyway, the car just takes off. Purrs like a kitten. So I turned to Vonda and Rodney. I said, look, it's late. You get in your car, head for Tulsa. I'll take care of our friend. They get in the car. They head away. I wave them off. I turn around. He's gone. I thought, what's the deal? Angel unaware? What do we got here? And so anyway, I look around and I see him over on the other side of the rest stop. He left his bike there. He's over there, kind of kicked back in the grass, is propped up by his elbows, smoking a cigarette. I go over to him and I said, hey, thanks for your help. The gal works at the college where I am. What can I do to help you? He said, just go home, man. I said, no, really. I mean, I'd like to thank you for helping out and appreciate it. Can I take you to town, get a piece for your bike? He said, no, there'll be a brother along pretty soon. I'll get a piece from him. I said, no, really, can I buy you a meal? Can I? I just look back at that now and I think, you idiot. But I was trying to be sympathetic to this guy. He said, look, man, he said, just go home. It's okay. So I thanked him. I got in my car. I drive home. About halfway, I think to myself, I just met the Good Samaritan. I just didn't know he came in leather. He just didn't look like I thought the Good Samaritan would look. And that's the strange, funny world of parables. Good guys are bad guys, and bad guys are good guys, and there's strange endings, and odd things, and open-ended stuff. Wow. What are we to say about these upside-down stories of Jesus, about the dynamic reign of God in the world?